But it's corruption because, like, at every step along the way, these guys have their own little fiefdoms, right? You know, distributing money to every football association in every country around the world is not a highly audited, thorough process of resource allocation, right? It's at every step along the way, at every domino, it goes through a corrupt little fiefdom where everybody is getting their form of a cut.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you to our Split Zone Duo listeners. Fun one today. I'm Alex Kirshner, joined by Richard Johnson, and a great guest for a crossover episode that I've wanted to do for quite some time. Richard, you know that I hate the idea of a 24-team college football playoff. I don't even care for the idea of a 16-team college football playoff. I've liked 12 just fine. It has provided, I think, a bit of cushion for losses, maybe a little bit of dilution of certain regular season moments, but it's created more stakes in other games. The Big Ten and the SEC have gotten paid, but I think it's worked out decently so far for everybody else. And I really don't want to see it expand. I've said it a million times. And yet there's been this like really hard thing for me the past couple of weeks, which is that I have been watching, like many of you, the World Cup, which had been at 32 teams since 1998. And that seemed like plenty. But this year it grew by 50% to 48 teams. Nobody disputes why FIFA did this. It was for television, obviously. But this odd thing has happened, which is that it just seems like the expansion has been pretty awesome. I've been following Cape Verde, just like everybody else. Incredible story. Curacao, Jordan, Uzbekistan all made their first appearances, created these big moments of national pride. Cape Verde has actually tied two of like the best soccer playing countries in the world. I hate to tip my cap, Richard, to FIFA, but would you agree that this has been going fairly well?
I think it's interesting because I don't know if I'm ready to render my opinion on that just yet. I did go to Norway, Senegal at MetLife the other day. Saw a great game, saw Erling Haaland, who, look, I will say it's one of the great travesties that we can't get 15 pounds of body weight on Erling Haaland and stick him at X receiver and just see how much fun we have. I do think in the second round of games, we started to see some cream rise to the top, second round of the group stage games, some cream rise to the top in some of the games. Like Portugal just absolutely smoked Uzbekistan like yesterday, for instance. So I'm interested in seeing how many kind of dead rubbers, as they call it, we have in the third group stage games where like nobody has any jeopardy. Like the US, they could lose by 10 goals. It doesn't matter. That's one thing. The other thing is with the extra round of knockout games, right? We have a round of 32 now versus just going straight into a Sweet 16 round of 16 situation. I'm interested in how those games go before I kind of render my opinion on whether 48 is a good number, the right number. But yes, as you've stated, FIFA did this for television money and to basically, I don't know if necessitate's the right word, but validate, I guess, doing this across 3 countries and multiple cities in 3 countries, especially most of them being in the United States.
Well, I've had a lot of questions about this, including, am I the bad guy for opposing college football playoff expansion as staunchly as I do, when to my eye, at least as a casual fan, it seemed like it's going well. And so to help sort through those questions, we have a tremendous soccer voice, one of the wisest people in the field, Mike Goodman, the co-host of the Double Pivot podcast. It's a soccer podcast co-hosted with Michael Cayley, one that my smartest soccer friends swear by as an indispensable resource for understanding the world's most beautiful game. Mike, thank you for coming on Split Zone Duo.
I am happy to be here. It's like the one time every 4 years where I do a whole bunch of non-soccer media because it's a big deal. And I'm happy to talk about the expansion of the World Cup. It is a really legitimately interesting set of circumstances, I think.
I really enjoy doing 2 things here. One is when I can, talking about other sports and finding ways to connect them back to college football. And 2 is challenging my existing beliefs because I'm just such a heterodox free thinker, can't be put in a box, a real maverick. And it has, Mike, given me a little bit of a crisis of confidence, which I don't want to get ahead of myself on and say that I am changing my view about college football playoff expansion. But I have been really curious about it just because of how this seems to have gone. How do you think expansion has gone in the World Cup this summer?
I agree that it's a little bit too early to declare it totally successful. And I think that the round of 32 question is the question that I'm really waiting on, and here's why. Nobody like is confused about who can win the World Cup. There are maybe 5 teams that can win it. And if it's not those 5 teams, then there's like 2 or 3 others that could like be really surprising. But of those 2 or 3 others, they're like Germany and Portugal, who are like traditional powerhouses anyway, to some degree or another. So going from 32 to 48, it doesn't really change the dynamics of who's possibly going to win, which you would think would be a problem, right? Like you would think that like that is like, oh, well, there's more meaningless games. But the other part of the World Cup, which is only every 4 years, has a 2-year-long qualifying process. It's a spectacle. It's an event. It's a showcase. And the group stage is as much about that showcase as it is about like who's gonna win in advance. So you have this weird mix, right? Where like there's this mix of like, you know, of those 5 favorites I mentioned, right? It's France, it's Spain, it's England, it's Argentina, and it's Brazil. 3 of them have you know, in their opening 2 games dropped points. You know, England tied with Ghana, Spain, as you were talking about, tied with Cape Verde, and Brazil tied with Morocco, which is a little more competitive. But like nobody thinks that means that, oh my God, these 3 teams are in trouble. It's part of the deal. And, you know, so the most playoff expansion that you're talking about, it's like, is there a round, and does that extra round involve more jeopardy? And for the World Cup, it's just more about the spectacle in the group stage still. Which is why I think that like, if you get a dead round of 32, if you get a round of 32 where there's 16 games with 16 clear favorites and 16 teams move on, which is not all that impossible, I think you will start to feel like a little of the good, like the feel good vibes start to get questioned and be like, do we really need this?
I do think that the one other thing that we lose there is like, so Spain draws Cabo Verde in the first game, right? You do lose the jeopardy of Spain potentially maybe not getting out of the group, right? Like England draws with Ghana yesterday, and they're still going to get through, right? Now, it's awesome for Cabo Verde that they get the draw, and it's an incredible day, but everybody's still going through, right?
It's true. And like you have traditionally seen with 32 teams, there are usually a couple of, 4 years ago, Germany didn't go through. 8 years ago, Germany also didn't go through. There are most years 1 or 2 teams in the group stage who shockingly go home. That's really not going to happen this year. And it's because the structure of the tournament is you're going from 48 to 32. And it's just, it's really hard to be a good team and not go through in that case.
And that's because select third place teams out of the 4 team groups get through, as opposed to previously it was just the top 2 of every 4 go through, correct?
Well, yeah, it's not select, it's literally almost all of them.
So it's 8 out of 12 third place teams go through, and it's the best 8 as determined by record, followed by goal difference, so on and so forth. This was the case when it was at 24 teams. So up until 1994, the tournament was 24 teams before it expanded to 32. And this was the same method where you had, you went from 24 to 16, and it was third place teams went through in that format. It's forgiving, right? Like it's a really forgiving format. And it does take some of the drama away from the group stage. Now, that said, like your path, your draw in the knockout stages, when you get a bracket and everybody gets, can look ahead, is dramatically different depending on whether you win your group or come in second or are a third place team. And like, you can see that with the United States, who have like walked into a cupcake draw here. Like they came into the tournament and like, I think most people expected them to get out of the group, but it wasn't a slam dunk. And right now, I think that like, Michael Kelly, my co-host, he's got his expecting goals like projection system. He has the US as the 4th most likely to get to the quarterfinals. And that's like based mostly on the strength of their, like how easy their draw is going to be because they're winning the group. So there is like a lot to play for in the group still, but it's not shock eliminations. And it does take the edge off.
That's really interesting to me because it sounds in a different way similar to the new first round of the college football playoff, where there's also not much chance that the number 5 team, for example, is going to get eliminated. But I suppose if you messed up once, that would be it, instead of in the World Cup group stage, where if you mess up once, even 1.5 times, if you just win one game out of your 3, you're more than good. You might not even need to do that in certain cases.
I think 3 points, so 3 draws will generally get you through. I think you almost do it with the third place teams. You almost do it like a cut line in golf, like a projected cut line, and you're looking at like the how many points and what goal difference you need. And usually, like the math is going to math out around 3 points and a -2 goal difference is right on the cusp. So there is the jeopardy is fairly low down in the in the competitive stakes. But like that said, and this is just a thing about soccer, is you have these like cross-competing purposes for being there. Like Haiti is not going to be sad about the fact that they're not going through, right? Like but Cabo Verde now may be sad if they don't go through, having gotten 2 draws. But when they came into the World Cup, having one great result or one like okay result and playing Spain tough would have been a great thing. And the way that soccer has always dealt with this kind of competitiveness is like winning the league isn't the only thing. Winning the tournament isn't the only thing, because there's a lot more competitive imbalance across the soccer landscape than there is across American sports. What they do is there's just a million different things to play for, like week in, week out in European soccer leagues or even in MLS. And it sort of carries over to something like a World Cup, where a lot of what you're there for is like, qualifying was winning for us. Scoring a goal might be winning for us. A point, being alive on the third group stage. There are all these like stages of accomplishment that really exist because the World Cup is this once every 4-year spectacle. So it's not just like advancing another round in the playoffs.
When this expansion was conceived, I'm curious if you think, other than for television money, I'm curious if you think it was geared in some ways to be friendly towards the Cabo Verdes, like to get more access, or was it? I'm curious, like where the balance is between catering to those teams and like an extra safety net for Brazil when they underachieve in South America.
No, it's much more the first thing, and to understand why you have to understand a little bit the politics of FIFA, which is that whoever is in charge of FIFA is put there by a vote of the confederations around the world. Every country's got a vote, and you go to the CAF, the African Confederation, and you say, hey, if you support me and your countries vote for me, I will expand the tournament, and that gets you a lot of support. And in fact, in a lot of ways, FIFA, which runs World Soccer and the World Cup, and UEFA, which runs soccer in Europe, are in a Cold War. There's a lot of like, we are competing for the eyes of worldwide soccer fans with each other. And, last summer, the Club World Cup was launched by FIFA for the first time, which is kind of like a direct shot across the bow of UEFA, which has the Champions League, obviously. Years ago, when there was this brief attempt to form a super league in Europe, those teams thought they had the tacit support of FIFA. And again, it was because of this tension between FIFA and UEFA, which is always just sort of simmering below the surface. And it turned out that went sour, and FIFA had all sorts of deniability and said, no, we support the current structures. But there is this undercurrent. And so this expansion of the World Cup is 100% about the people in power at FIFA. Gianni Infantino running for re-election, Sepp Blatter before him did similar things, catering to the world as the broader base of their political support within the organization.
I find FIFA to be almost refreshingly corrupt. People people think that there's corruption in American sports. I don't say that there isn't. I'm not trying to say that, but that FIFA's artists just playing in a different game, in a different sandbox, just much like the IOC.
Very much like the IOC. Yeah.
I hear FIFA kind of akin to like a floating government wherever they go, countrywide, whatever country they go, even this one. They are doing things with the ticket prices, with the transportation prices. Hello, just took a $98 train from Penn Station to MetLife.
Yep.
They are doing things that
Continue.
Oh.
I don't want to get bogged down. Alan. What?
Brother.
Oh, it's a great that whole story is a great story about how that came to be.
$98. That is the cut rate. It was supposed to be $150 for me to get from Penn Station to MetLife via Secaucus transfer. Yes, 98 bones.
So whose fault is this? Is this on New York or New Jersey? Or both?
This is on New Jersey. Basically, the governor in New Jersey was like, I want them, the tourists or the people going to the games, to pay for it. Because as we know, MetLife is in New Jersey, despite the fact that they keep calling it New York, New Jersey, to the point, Mike, oh my God, to the point, I don't know if you've been yet, but at the game, they were doing things like, get on your feet, New York, New Jersey.
Oh, it's absurd. I will also say that there are games at Foxborough and it's being called Boston. And I had my timing was I flew back from Europe shortly before the tournament began, and I had a whole bunch of Scottish people on my flight who were coming over because Scotland was playing their opening match versus Haiti at Foxborough. And I would just sort of be like, oh yeah, we're going to the game in Boston. I would be like, you're sure you know how you're getting to the stadium, right? Like,
Mike, it's funny because I'm literally in Boston right now. I'm doing this show in Boston. And so, yeah, we were walking around this morning getting breakfast, and there were some English fans here because England played here yesterday. And it's the same deal. It's not easy to get from Boston to Foxborough. It's like a 1-lane or 2-lane road to get down there. It's not in Boston. And it's the same thing. The train tickets are like crazy expensive, like all that kind of stuff. So FIFA's doing things here that they know that they can get away with because it's America. Versus when they go back to hydration breaks. Hello, like UEFA's already said they're not going to do hydration breaks for the 2028 Euros in England. Like they're doing things because they can get away with them. Here is FIFA.
Not to take us tue far afield here, but it's actually really interesting. The transportation stuff in particular. 2022, the World Cup was in Qatar, right? And one of the things that FIFA was able to do, because Qatar is a very centralized authoritarian state, is they could say to Qatar, hey, we want the World Cup ticket to come with free transportation, free mass transportation when you're in the country. And the government could just say, okay. And we had Adam Crafton, who's a reporter for The Athletic, who's great. He came on our podcast. He was talking about all this stuff. And he was like, FIFA wanted to do that with the United States. And it's like, it doesn't work in the United States. And when you make the deal to have the World Cup in the United States, they just say to you, look, if you want free transport, that's great. Go talk to the cities. Even if we wanted to give that to you with FIFA tickets, we cannot. And so FIFA actually had a little bit of a difficult time after Qatar in 22 and Russia before it in 2018, like getting the sort of sweetheart autocratic deals that it wanted to get for people attending the World Cup for the World Cup event. And so what you have is this stuff that develops.
If you have been listening to this show since the beginning or for any amount of time, you already know our dear partners at Homefield. You can find them at homefieldapparel.com. I think every time of year is a good time to check out Homefield's products, to wear them in various parts of your body. The one I want to talk about right now, though, is your head. It is summertime. If you are like me, you have been struggling a lot with the extremely bright rays that come off the sun and go near your eyes and onto your forehead. And I am happy to report that right now at homefieldapparel.com, you can check out Homefield's hat mystery boxes. No matter what your favorite style of hat is, you can get dad hats, trucker hats, snapback hats, corduroy hats. You've probably seen all of these different styles in the Homefield catalog for your school or another school whose collection you admire. You can also buy single hats, of course, for your school or just about any other in the Homefield catalog. Check this out at homefieldapparel.com. Look stylish. Keep the sun out of your eyes. These are two of the most important food groups this time of year. Thank you very much to our partners at homefieldapparel.com. I have a question, Mike. Richard kind of alludes to it as corruption as part of the FIFA model, with maybe pandering by elected officials to large voting blocks, and so they expand the World Cup. It almost sounds, granted, the line between corruption and just straight up, populism, which is much less of a negative connotation, can be a little bit blurry sometimes. Is this corruption, or is this just the result of FIFA being a governing body where you have to please a lot of people? Because I actually think college football might benefit if the Mountain West got a vote.
It is corruption, but it's corruption because like at every step along the way, these guys have their own little fiefdoms, right? You know, distributing money to every football association in every country around the world is not a highly audited, thorough process of resource allocation, right? It's at every step along the way, at every domino, it goes through a corrupt little fiefdom where everybody is getting their form of a cut. And everybody in the process understands that when you say we're going from 32 to 48 teams for the World Cup, we are changing the degrees of access and who has the ability to get their own little taste. And, you know, for a United States World Cup, what that's really about is FIFA sort of sticking the money funnel in as far as it can go and extracting as many dollars and states from a United States consumer economy as it can for, like, yes, eventually some of this money gets to football development around the world, but a lot of it gets into the hands of the people that run the game, you know, along the way. And everybody sort of understands that's what it's about.
Yeah, if you're listening to this podcast, just Google Jack Warner if you want to have a party. He's a real pioneer.
Man had an apartment for his cats.
Absolutely, yes. And like, there's that. And then, Alex, you bring it up and you mention it as effectively populism. Like, I never want to do it. You got to hand it to FIFA. But like, Sepp Blatter did bring the World Cup to Africa. Like, it's and you have to kind of in the way where you say, well, America's a land of contrast, FIFA's a land of contrast. Like, you have to kind of acknowledge that while also obviously, while also obviously pointing out and bringing up the much more negative things that they have done on the ledger. Like, yes, did they bring the World Cup to Qatar, to the Gulf states, to a different part of the world? Sure. Did they use migrant slave labor to do it? Yeah. So it's that's when we talk about FIFA, that kind of borderline of, not even borderline. That's when we talk about when does populism become corruption. I don't even want to pretend that there's some firewall between the two.
And like, just to add to the point on Qatar, it went to Qatar because of explicit bribes that were paid to get it to go to Qatar. People went to
that is not
kicked
populist.
out of the sport and went to jail. Qatar got the World Cup because they bribed people to get the World Cup. It, like, cut and dry. It's you don't need an allegedly at the beginning of that sentence.
Yeah. So Mike, when we get to this actual format that we have now, with the 48 teams soon to become 32 to become 16, and then on and on and on, because of the dynamic that you just discussed, where everyone's got to get a taste in order to vote for people. It does seem that we've gotten a lot of World Cup teams that 4 that have never been in it before. And by definition, 16 more teams that would have been in it. And a lot of them do seem to be teams that wouldn't normally get this shot. How well do you think this system has worked to get more countries excited about soccer by way of providing quote unquote access?
Yeah, I think it works. I think that there's nothing wrong with like that part of the system and that construction. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the competitiveness at the World Cup either for providing extra access to 16 teams. Like, I do really think that it is a spectacle, and it is a good like, the thing that we joke on our podcast is like, FIFA has the football. As problematic as FIFA is, as corrupt as it is, as morally challenging as being a fan during the World Cup can be, you watch the games, you watch what it means to people, you watch the spectacle, and man, just FIFA has the football, and the football really does, like, during these weeks, just shine. And it shines in so many ways. Like, at the end of the tournament, we're going to get insane competitive high stakes matches. Now you get these awesome stories of, like, going to Cabo Verde and watching a match there. We, were able to send a writer to Curacao in the build up. Like, all of these stories are great, and they're real, and they are absolutely legitimate. Like, so are the stories of people not being able to get visas to come and watch their teams. Like, you don't want to whitewash the problems with the good stuff, but that doesn't mean the good stuff isn't there. And the tournament really does have a lot of this, like, real fun energy.
Yeah, it's, when you talk about the Scottish fans, like, kind of taking over Boston, for instance, the Scottish fans who don't look a lot like me taking over Boston. And then you realize whose fans aren't here in such droves.
Yeah,
you realize
absolutely.
The referee that quite literally could not get into the country.
Team that isn't allowed to make camp in the United States and has to go off across the border within minutes after their game's in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Look, I want to highlight that I think there's two sort of different competing things going on here. Like, Iran, who is not allowed to stay in the country after their games and has just been allowed to come more than 24 hours before kickoff to play their games, is what happens when the current political climate sort of like directs its eye of Sauron on a problem. A lot of the other stuff is what happens because there's a lot of neglect of the World Cup as an event in the United States in the current political climate. There are a lot of problems and challenges that would have been solved even by the current political administration had anybody paid attention to them more than 20 minutes before the tournament started. But they didn't. And,
it's interesting because I thought that was part of the point of the bribery with the fake peace prize. Like that it's like, I actually kind of assumed that some of this would go off with less of a hitch, kind of because sometimes corruption makes the trains run really efficiently. It was sort of like that. And
I mean, that's why that
didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, that is why Gianni Infantino was at the White House like twice a week for 6 months before the World Cup. Like, he, as FIFA president, understood the assignment. But there is only so much you can do to make things in a big, complicated country work. And, like, some of the stuff about there was a Swiss player who initially had their entrance to the U.S. denied and then 24 hours later came in. This was just because people were asleep at the switch. Like, it really, really was.
It's incompetence versus malice to an extent.
Yeah. And, like, to be clear, malice can absolutely drive incompetence, right? Like not feeling like it's important to have this squared away in a way that it would have been otherwise is its own form of malice. But it is definitely coming from a different place than when you talk about Iran, who had to change where their base camp was going to be for the World Cup because the United States decided they would not let them stay in Arizona.
Mike, on the expansion logistics, so there's a lot here that I'm really curious about. It seemed like from the different pathways that the expansion created, like you had these explicit cases like we talked about with Cabo Verde and some other teams where they just had a clear path now that they might not have had before. And that's great. Like one of the things that I like about the 12-team college football playoff is that it hits that magical A word, access, which doesn't mean you can contend, but gives a certain level of meaning to the games that are happening before the playoff, the regular season in college football. And I guess in international soccer, it would be the 2 years prior of matches that teams are playing. The thing that I worry about with a college football playoff expansion is, will Georgia literally never miss the playoff? Will there never be a truly high stakes regular season Texas game ever again? Because, Texas has had some years where they would have been bad enough to miss it. Maybe Ohio State's the best example. Can Ohio State literally never miss the playoff ever? Like in 50 years, never miss it. I noticed that Italy is not in this World Cup.
Sure is it?
So I guess because it's a serious point. Like, do you think that that FIFA preserved enough scarcity you can still miss it? Because Italy's won a World Cup in my lifetime.
There was this imbalance before, even at 32 teams, and it's because like soccer talent is so unevenly distributed around the world. That like the thing that's so incredible about Italy missing is that even in Europe, most of their qualification games should be gimmies, should be cupcakes. Like England plays, San Marino a couple of times or whoever, like the lowest seeded in their.
Shout out Liechtenstein.
Yeah, exactly. Luxembourg is a very nice city. I have been there, but they're not putting together a competitive football team really. And so you have this dynamic already. It was shocking in 2018 when the US missed the World Cup, because in CONCACAF, the North American and Caribbean Federation, US and Mexico are like structurally, they're always supposed to make it. So much has to go wrong to miss it. So this has kind of always been the case at the margins, where what you have is like the best teams in the world should always make it, and it's unbelievably shocking if they don't. And then it's everybody else competing for the remaining spots. Except it's like, until this World Cup, actually, Africa had kind of an insane like structure to their qualifying, where like no matter how good you were, it was a 1 game or 2 game really playoff at the end of it, and half the teams made it and half didn't from that round. And so you would have a lot of good teams miss every time. And then eventually Africa decided, this is insane. We don't want like many of our most high profile teams to miss the World Cup. We're going to change our structure.
But Nigeria's still not here.
Yeah, Nigeria is still not here. It is true. They have nobody to blame for that one but themselves, though, is the thing. So like you do have like a couple of countries, even at 48 teams, where they shockingly miss out. But yeah, this thing is constructed. And again, it's because it's once every 4 years. It's like it's pretty damaging if you have a major team who is not in this tournament. It's constructed so that the best teams, the biggest teams in the world, will only occasionally miss, apparently, unless they're Italy.
And it also set up, I was also going to say, it also sets up for, in a way, it's in a way that I don't think American sports fans realize. Like, Mike, you correct me if I'm wrong here. I've never seen a U.S. team play like they have played the last 2 games. I mean, it's
unreal. It's great.
But what people don't realize is they've been playing possum. They've been hiding. And you're able to do this because you don't have to actually qualify when you host.
There is that. Yeah.
Now, there's
a fine line here, right? There's a fine line between, hey, we can, experiment, not play our best, try to find new talent, try different tactics, different formations, all of this stuff, and then come together in the World Cup. And then there's the problem of, hey, we're the United States. Most of the time, we play the vast majority of our games that matter against teams that are worse than us in our location, right? In CONCACAF. And then we have to go to a major tournament in the World Cup every 4 years. And there are 15 to 20 teams that are better than us. And we have to figure out a way how to be successful in both circumstances. And that is that has been like the substantive challenge of US soccer for 15 years. And so just the international structures around international soccer create really weird sort of ripples and dynamics in that way.
I also think, and I wonder if this is sort of what you're talking about when you mentioned the spectacle of the group stage of the 48-team World Cup. If I'm looking more charitably on World Cup expansion exclusively because it's an every 4 years event. Like, I don't have time to be tired of any of these teams. And Richard knows, and a lot of our listeners might have intuited this. I like soccer just fine. I'm not trying to be a meathead about it. I'm not watching non-World Cup, non-Euro international team games more than a couple times every 4 years. And so I couldn't get sick of this. Whereas if a 9-3 Big Ten team that's lost all of its good opponents gets into the playoff, and I've seen them 10 times that year, I might be kind of sick of that.
Oh, that's absolutely true. And the other thing about this, right, is like, if you look at, say, the Spain-Cabo Verde situation, right, where that group, those 4 teams that are playing each other are Spain, Uruguay, Saudi Arabia, and Cabo Verde. Saudi Arabia is a team that has been a borderline World Cup team for 20 years, maybe longer. They famously upset Argentina in the group stage. The last World Cup, Argentina goes on to win the whole World Cup. The difference between Saudi Arabia and Cabo Verde is much, much smaller than the difference between either of those 2 teams and Spain. And so what you are doing when you expand the tournament is you're not letting in teams that are already dramatically worse than the teams that are there now. What you're doing is you're letting in more teams that absolutely are significantly worse than teams that have a shot to win the whole thing, but are not worse than the strata of teams that were already there, that bring their own diverse stories, their own diverse situations, without really making it like the competitive thing that we talked about is like, it's even harder for the good teams to get eliminated in the group stage.
Yeah.
It's not that these individual teams are so much worse.
So I'm so interested by this point specifically. FIFA brought in a bunch of new teams that aren't going to win, that aren't very competitive. Do you feel like the soccer world has a fracture of people on the other side of that who are like, only best on best? I don't want these teams in this if they don't have a chance to win it. Why aren't we just separating the wheat from the chaff? Because we do have that very much in college football. It's kind of the main culture war of the sport.
I think you have it a little bit, but at the same time, there's like 8 teams or whatever that have ever won a World Cup, right? Mm-hmm. Like once you've gone from 16 to 24 to 32, I think it's like a lot easier to make that argument from 24 to 32 than it is from 32 to 48. And then the other thing I'd say is like, if you're a US fan, if you're supporting US soccer and like, obviously I do a lot of stuff internationally. I have to, I cover soccer, but like I'm an American broadcaster, right? Like the podcast is centered in America. I work at CBS, like for CBS, for the website covering soccer. Like I come from a distinctly American perspective. You can't really be on the side of like only the best of the best should be in this tournament, because then we wouldn't be there. Like we are outside the circle of who should be here. And 1994, the last time the US hosted a World Cup, was very much a case of like, we want to expand who is interested in soccer generally to include the United States. And that project, sort of you come back now to see if it's borne fruit. But like the US is on the outside of that circle. So you might get some of that, but like, I don't know. There are other tournaments. There's Euros. There's Copa America. Like
the other tournaments thing, Mike, is big, I think, because here what you would say is, oh, well, the G5 should have its own playoff. Well, Africa does. Africa literally has the Africa combinations.
Right.
Like the other CONCACAF teams, well, they may not win CONCACAF, and there's a conversation about whether CONCACAF and CONMEBOL, which is South America's federation, should merge so that America could play Argentina and Brazil and Uruguay. A different story. But like the minnow federations do have their own playoffs every other 2 years.
Yep.
I find this more interesting to watch. I find it more interesting as a spectator as well. I think because of the nature of soccer, once they're in, like you mentioned earlier, Mike, that you don't think any of the big brands, like the major prestige soccer nations, are really at risk of getting knocked out over the course of the group stage because 32 teams get through. But it does strike me that just because of the nature of soccer, like we just saw it, Spain can still get 0-0 drawn against Cabo Verde in a way that, I don't know, like I was told that this was one of the biggest upsets in sports history, and I'm not disputing that, but 0-0 seems possible, right? You can park the bus and you can have, like, you can win a point, like you can win a spiritual victory in a way that if the college football equivalent happened, we would be talking about that coach as the greatest coach of this era right now. If the 12 seed were to go on the road and win a first round game, 10-3 or whatever.
Yeah, I think it is true. I think it's also true that like round robin changes things. In that game, for example, Spain didn't play either of their 2-star wingers who were both coming back from injury. Could they have rushed Lamine Yamal back to start that game? Well, he started the next game, so maybe he plays half an hour more if it's an elimination game, and maybe that doesn't happen. It is true that underdogs have this possibility to get a draw in a way that doesn't exist in American sports. It's also true, I bet, that the talent difference between Spain and Cabo Verde is still different than a 1 and a 12 seed in a college football playoff. It's certainly different than anything you're going to find in any American professional sport. And this is, the gradients of talent across soccer. And this is in large part because of the economic differences between the biggest and the smallest are just massive. I mean, they're huge. And that's not to say that unexpected teams can't succeed. Like 4 years ago, Morocco made the semifinals, and that was legitimately very surprising. Croatia is European, so sometimes they don't get included in this. But they are a very small, not very wealthy country that has just had a golden generation of talent and done very, very well. But it is in a knockout stage tournament so hard to do that 2 times, 3 times to get deep into this tournament if you're one of these smaller teams. Which is why it's important that you get these moments, right?
Mike, so you actually just brought up something that I legitimately am interested in. There's not anybody on Cabo Verde's team that would crack like Spain's squad, like Spain's 23, to the point where, quite frankly, the reason why Morocco's actually pretty good is because there are players on Morocco's team that, hello colonialism, cannot get into Spain's roster, even though they are eligible by birth, by grandparents, by whoever. But how many, and Alex, how many players on James Madison could crack Oregon's 2 deep? You know what I mean?
4 or 5, maybe.
That's close. I mean, to be honest, that's closer than what we're looking at in soccer.
Yeah. That is really closer. Nobody in Cabo Verde is getting near Spain's squad. Whereas maybe, a couple players on Tulane could play for Ole Miss.
But they could 0-0 them, and James Madison could not possibly do that to Oregon.
That's right. No, that's absolutely right. You have greater talent divergence in soccer, and it is somewhat, because it is so hard to score goals, somewhat harder to bring all of that talent to bear over a given 90 minutes. That's just sort of the structure of the sport.
While we're talking about the World Cup, I want to say thank you to a company that can help you get all around the world. That, of course, is our partners at Nokian Tires. Nokian is running something really fun this summer. You can follow along at Nokian Tires NA on social media, Instagram, etc. But also go to nokiantires.com/guide, and you can enter your destination, real or imagined, for your own dream summer road trip. I know people are taking a lot of those. I'm fresh off of one myself. It's a great time of year to be traveling around, especially if you can do it on 4 wheels. If you do that at nokiantires.com/guide, you'll be entered to win Nokian Tire swag. You follow along on Instagram. You'll find practical tips, highlights from other people's best entries. You can even make up where you're going, and Nokian will not bother you about it. Thank you very much to our partners at Nokian Tires. Travel somewhere fun this summer. It's a great time to do it. Mike, when James Madison was playing Oregon last December, Richard and I were both in alignment on this, and I, if memory serves, we were pretty explicit about it before the game. James Madison has no chance in this game. We are not going to entertain. Like, there are years where I would think that a really good group of 6 representative could win against the 5 seed in the playoff. Maybe. I'm not going to say it's never going to happen. I think it probably will, but it just wasn't going to happen here. There was way too big a talent disparity. We didn't believe in it. But I still liked that this game was happening because the pathway to the playoff for James Madison enriched more of their games and more games in their conference and other conferences like it over the previous 15 weeks. Has that happened or does that even need to happen with international soccer sort of, not during the World Cup? You mentioned, Richard, they already have continental championships that are a big deal. So I'm not sure if international soccer fans were starved for access to the World Cup.
Look, every country in the world starts the process of qualifying for the World Cup, with an opportunity. Every country in every federation around the world begins the playoff process of getting into the World Cup. It is it is true that as you expand, you have a more optimistic path. If you are a Cabo Verde, if you're especially this year, if you're a Curacao, because in North America, right, the US, Canada, and Mexico all were automatically in this tournament as the hosts. And even with that, you still have teams that have been borderline World Cup teams in the past that missed out from North America. Jamaica's not here. Costa Rica's not here. And so it is a competitive process in that way. But I think it comes back to sort of what, I think what you're talking about with that path being viable is just how soccer works in general, right? That you have these signposts along the way that everybody has just decided is meaningful, right? Haiti qualifying for the World Cup from CONCACAF this time, second time ever. It's just everybody understands that and believes that to be a worthwhile accomplishment, regardless of what they do at the tournament. And that's a playoff process, right? That's a qualification through a playoff process. And for Haiti, those games mean a lot. In a normal year when the U.S. is qualifying for the World Cup, people get up for those games, because you want to make sure that you have it locked down. And now we all remember 2018 where they didn't qualify. Those games matter. So I don't think that expanding it did a lot to change that dynamic in qualification, because there's enough hope at the beginning of a qualification process that a large percentage of teams are pretty invested.
Richard, it's interesting. Hearing this is sort of breaking any connection in my mind that makes me think of what I see as the success of the World Cup expansion should apply then to college football.
Because when you talk about there is a true meritocracy, meritocratic, is that the word?
Meritocratic.
To get into the World Cup, right? At the end of the day, 12-1, James Madison, that one loss being its conference championship game, was not getting in to they would never have been voted in to the college football playoff.
If they had lost their conference championship instead of a regular season game to Louisville, that would have been it. Yeah.
Right. They never would have, 12-2 in that respect, would have never gotten in versus, yes, you can play your way there if you're pick your minnow country.
But the complicated thing about it in soccer is what that means is that a 48-team World Cup is not the best 48 teams in the world. And that's something that's pretty comfortable in soccer. You look at a 36-team UEFA Champions League tournament. It's not the best 36 teams in Europe, right? Because it's teams from small, in the best 36 teams in Europe, there might be 8, 9, or 10 English teams. You get 4, 5, or 6, depending on the year. 6 is hard. So soccer's sort of it's not explicit about it, but they are comfortable with that concept, right? That we have these tournaments and we create them because we draw in teams from these various places to make the field. And the field size is not just the best number of teams.
I wish that more people in college football were more comfortable with that, because in a lot of sports, this happens to varying degrees. I mean, what is a 7-win NFC South champion happens every so often, or an 8-9 NFC South champion. And I don't think that too many people swore off the NFL playoffs because of that. And it sounds like roughly nobody in the world of soccer is doing that either. Where this takes my brain is, okay, expand the playoff to 16 or 24 teams and actually guarantee more spots for the group of 6, because they're not going to do that. I know they're not going to do that, but that would be a version of expansion, even though I don't think those teams could win, that would kind of create this potpourri of college football, massive spectacle feeling. And it wouldn't be that out of line with the way that other sports act.
But Alex, we're not going to expand the college football playoff that way.
No, we're not.
Because of who votes on it, who decides on it. Obviously, it is 2 leagues that have the lion's share of votes in college football playoff expansion. You also cater to literally one school with the structure of the playoff and who gets a bid if they are in the top 12. Hello, Notre Dame.
The Notre Dame situation is the opposite of what Mike was just describing for us with the way that governance decisions are made for the World Cup.
Yeah, it's if we took a team that was good 50 years ago.
Be nice.
Yes, I should be nicer to Notre Dame. It's if we took a team that has historically been really great. I was trying to make an England comparison, but no, Notre Dame is historically better than England has been. It's you're not the college or the FIFA version, or the soccer version, I should say, of what college football playoff expansion should be is a Champions League concept, right? 10 conference champions get in. And everybody gets a way in and they plays their way in. That's what happens with the Champions League. There's no reason why Bodo Glimt should ever sniff a UEFA competition. That's Norway's sometimes best team. It's in air quotes ridiculous to the sensibilities of an American sports fan, and yet they have that there and they're comfortable with it. And Bodo Glimt makes the semifinal of UEFA's 2nd tier competition last year.
Yeah, I mean, it does come with its own set of problems, right? And I think you will find in soccer, people sort of complain about the same teams being deep in a tournament every single time. And they'll say that about the Champions League, and they'll say that about the World Cup. You know, when we're down to the final 8, and it's, you know, Argentina and Brazil and England and France and Spain, and, you know, maybe there's like 1 or 2 unexpected teams, you will hear people say, after all of that, 48 teams and all the whole thing, it's still the same teams at the end. And like, that's true, right? That's the price you pay for building a tournament where you want it to be the reward for some teams and the beginning of the path for other teams, and putting them all on the same field.
Yeah.
Like, that is the flip side of the coin. I like it. I think like I'm invested in how it works. I think it works really well. But I think that oftentimes I will hear people trying to quote unquote fix that problem. And it's like, that's not really, I mean, that existing is inherent in how you've built this thing. And I think that's okay.
There's also there's a term for it too, by the way. And you'll hear it when we get to the knockout round. They call it the business end of the tournament. It's actually really funny. Like when we get to the time when the real teams are there, they literally refer to it as the business end of the tournament.
Mike, I feel like your point is really sound about the World Cup being able to be 2 things. Like it can be a tournament, a step where you have to complete several more steps if you are a World Cup championship contender, or it's the reward in and of itself for a Cabo Verde or a like team, which just gets to be there. I think what I don't want my tournaments to be, and what I would say is, to my eye, but please do argue with me, the downside of World Cup expansion is like the case. I did a little looking here, and you're going to have to, again, double fact check me because I'm not the soccer man here, but it's the case of like Brazil or Sweden, a couple teams that, as I was kind of reading through the qualification criteria, like teams that are plenty good enough to be here, where just making the World Cup isn't special to them, shouldn't be special to them, but they got in anyway because of expansion.
So, I mean, Brazil's a little different. Brazil is one of the best 5 teams in this tournament. Yes, they had a kind of like down qualification campaign, but they're a team that, like, if they tied on points with a number of other teams, which is why the headline is that they were like 5th in South American qualifying. It would have been a world-stopping soccer shock if they were not in the tournament. Sweden is a perfect example of this. Switzerland is a really good example of this. You know, it's mostly European teams that consistently get in the tournament. So, like, being here is not a big deal, but also
can't win.
Yeah.
That is my biggest beef about the way that college sports expansion is going right now. And it's actually worse in basketball. Like, they're expanding the basketball tournament so that last year's Auburn's men's team doesn't miss the tournament, which to me sucks. Like, I don't need more middling Big Ten and SEC teams that are pretty good to be in the field. If you were expanding it and you were bringing more hope to the masses and just letting me watch more basketball on that Thursday and Friday, like, cool, great. I think what I fear is getting stuck in that no man's land.
Yeah, and that's sort of why, like, way back at the beginning of the podcast, when I was like, let's see how the round of 32 goes before we, like, crown this as a definitely successful achievement, it's like, let's see how many of these teams that are here, like, a lot, but don't have a chance to win the tournament, we feel excited about seeing play.
Sure.
And, you know, it's a little bit weird in international soccer because, like, how do you quantify Japan, for example? Like, Japan are a good team. They're here all the time. This is not an expansion issue, right? Like, they're here. You know, they're always one of the top teams in Asia. But, like, if they had a down year and so they didn't miss it, so they got into the tournament, like, it's really cool. Japan is not a traditional soccer powerhouse. They always play well. They play well against good teams. They have upset teams in the past. They're also not going to win the tournament. So are they a power conference team, or are they You know, are they a mid-major? Like, what are they? It doesn't map exactly cleanly, even though like the set of issues are the same.
Yep.
Australia is a really good example of this too. Australia are at every World Cup. They actually moved from the Oceania Conference into the Asia Conference because this had a lot to do with club football and stuff as well, but it's just like all the teams from Australia were so much better than the teams they were playing against. They moved into Asia. They still qualify all the time. Like, I don't think they've, like, somebody, I might be wrong, but I don't think I am. I don't think they've ever moved past the round of 16. Like, if they make it because of an expanded tournament, like, I don't think it's all that exciting. I think the jeopardy for them is, like, are we going to be there again? But at the same time, like, they're not a European team that you see all the time. You know, they are something a little different. This is their chance to play against even the United States of the world, right? Like, so it's tricky. It's a balance.
Yeah. Mike, this is, even though it doesn't map perfectly onto college football, this has been really interesting for me to get a sense of your experience with the sport that you cover day to day, doing kind of this maximalist, or dare I say not maximalist, maybe they'll do it again, expansion. Last thing, if you were consulting the powers that be in college football on what they should be thinking about, and hey, who knows, even what they should do as they consider expanding their playoff, pretend that you were not on a retainer or financially beholden to the Big Ten, the SEC, to Notre Dame, or to a G6 conference, but you just wanted the median fan of the sport to enjoy it more and for it to be a better event. What would you advise?
I think that if you're going to expand, you need to do it in a way, as we were talking about, that makes a graduated reward of some sort. I think there's a million different ways you can do it. You can do a playoff that's split into two conference paths going to a championship game, where maybe you keep all the big teams on one side and some of the other teams on the other side. You can have a much bigger, broader system where, like, teams are going to lose at the beginning. But like, as we were saying, it's like the pinnacle is getting there. I think the danger that I would see for college football, and it seems to be the path they're sort of like blinkered and locked into, is like, you make a traditional playoff bigger, in which the only thing that matters is winning the whole thing, and you bring in more teams that can't win the whole thing. And I think that those two things are at odds, and you got to solve that problem.
Mike Goodman of the Double Pivot podcast and CBS Sports. It's been a real pleasure. Mike, thank you for making the time. I know you've got like 12 hours today of soccer watching and then additional writing you have to do. So we all really appreciate you making the time for us while you're at it.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Richard. This was a lot of fun. It's a really good conversation.
U.S. World Cup coming. What's our team cheer? What do we say?
You don't want to do the full "I believe" on this.
Yeah, I believe.
I do.
I believe that we will win.
That's right.
I do. We don't have time for that.
We're leaving that in. Our producer's leaving that in.
There you go. I'm going to lunch.